The stale air of the small airport customs, late flight clung to me like a shroud. Fluorescent tubes hummed a tired lullaby, casting a sickly yellow pallor on the tired faces shuffling through the gate. My own face, I imagined, was a mask of indifference, a skill honed over years of staring into the abyss. This was my new normal, a quiet life, a steady paycheck, a deliberate erasure of the man I used to be. The ache in my shoulder, a phantom limb from a night best forgotten, was a constant reminder of that erasure, a dull throb against the dull ache in my soul. I was waiting for a flight, a routine trip for? Well, it didn't matter. Routine was the key word. No more chasing shadows, no more whispers in the dark, just the mundane hum of existence. My gaze drifted to the baggage carousel, a metallic serpent shedding its weary cargo. Then my phone buzzed, a jarring intrusion into the carefully constructed quiet. A single, unread message from an unknown number. They found it, just like you remember. My breath hitched. The words, stark and simple, ripped through the fragile peace I'd built. Just like you remember. He remembered. After all this time, someone remembered. My fingers, usually steady, trembled as I scrolled through the news feeds. A robbery, a string of them actually, all within the last week. A heist at a jewelry exchange downtown, another at a private art gallery, and now a third, just this morning at the city's main vault. The modus operandi the reports hinted was precise, almost surgical, a knot tightened in my chest, precision. That was his signature, not brute force, but elegance. The face I'd never seen, the name I'd never known, the case that had broken me. I stood frozen, the world around me fading into a blur of tired travelers and blinking lights. The message, the heists, it couldn't be. Not after all these years. I'd buried it deep, the guilt and the failure, along with the ghost of the man I was. But this felt like a deliberate resurrection, a taunt. "Sir, my boarding pass?" The customs officer's voice jolted me back. I fumbled in my jacket pocket, my hand shaking. He glanced at my ticket, his eyes lingering for a fraction too long on my face. I saw a flicker of recognition, or perhaps just the weariness of a man who'd seen too many faces pass through this sterile purgatory. "Just a quick trip, sir?" he asked, his tone polite but probing. "Something like that," I managed, my voice rough. I avoided his gaze, focusing on the stamp he was about to press into my passport. He was just doing his job, just another cog in the machine, unlike the one who'd built his own elaborate, terrifying machine. As I walked towards the gate, my mind raced. The meticulous planning, the utter lack of witnesses, the way the perpetrator seemed to anticipate every move, every security measure. It was too much of a coincidence. The reports mentioned a specific type of drill used to bypass the vault's reinforced steel, a drill I'd seen before in the evidence room, a relic from a case that had consumed me. I sat down in a hard plastic seat, the fluorescent hum now a maddening drone. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. I scrolled through the news again, searching for any detail, any anomaly that might confirm my sudden horror. The reports were vague on specifics, deliberately so, perhaps, but the pattern. The first heist, the jewelry exchange, had been dismissed as a professional job. The art gallery a bit more unusual, but still within the realm of possibility for skilled thieves, but the vault. The city's central vault, a fortress of steel and concrete, breached with such unnerving ease. That was the tipping point. That was the echo. I'd tried to outrun it, to bury it under layers of mundane routine, but it seemed the past had a way of finding eye, especially when it wore familiar clothes. The man who had orchestrated those heists, the phantom I'd chased for so long, was back, and he was making his presence known. A wave of nausea washed over me, but it was no use. The ghost was awake. The quiet life was over. The air in the small airport customs, late flight area hung thick with the smell of stale coffee and desperation. Fluorescent tubes hummed a discordant lullaby, casting a sickly yellow glow on the weary faces queued before me. The officer's gaze finally slid away, replaced by the next traveler's passport. I breathed, a ragged, shallow thing, and stepped forward, the worn leather of my jacket a familiar weight against my ribs. My own passport felt alien in my hand, a relic from a life I'd tried to bury. Outside, the night air was a sharp slap, laced with the metallic tang of the sea. The tarmac stretched out, a black ribbon under a sky bruised with distant city lights. My rented sedan, a nondescript gray beast, waited patiently. As I slid into the driver's seat, the interior's recycled air did little to clear the fog in my head. That flicker in the officer's eye, was it recognition, or just the vacant stare of a man drowning in a sea of passing faces? I pushed it down. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered but the whisper of a name I hadn't dared to speak aloud for years. The drive into the city was a blur of neon and shadows. Each passing street sign, each familiar intersection was a ghost of a past I'd tried to outrun. But the past, I was learning, had a long reach. The news report had been brief, almost dismissive. A string of daring robberies, each executed with an unnerving precision. The details, however, had snagged on something deep within me, a raw nerve exposed. It was him. It had to be him. I parked the sedan blocks away from the warehouse district, the air growing heavier, pregnant with the scent of brine and something vaguely chemical. The warehouse itself loomed, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised sky. A lone security guard, a hulking shape in the dim light of the entrance, stood sentinel. I'd seen his kind before, hired hands more accustomed to breaking up drunken brawls than facing genuine menace. I walked with a purpose I didn't feel, my gait a carefully constructed illusion. The guard's eyes tracked me, his hand instinctively going to the bulky radio on his hip. Evening, I grunted, my voice rough, unused. Looking for contact, said to meet him around here. He eyed me, his gaze sweeping over my worn clothes, the stubble on my jaw. No one's expecting anyone, place is closed. He said, a late delivery, said he'd be the one to see. I offered a thin, tight smile. Name's Cole. He hesitated, then a grudging nod. All right, but I ain't staying long and no funny business. He gestured vaguely towards the yawning maw of the warehouse. He's in the back, loading Bay 3. The interior was vast, cavernous, the air thick with dust motes dancing in the weak shafts of moonlight piercing the grimy windows. The scent of damp concrete and decaying crates was overwhelming. My footsteps echoed, each one a betrayal of my presence. There, amidst stacks of forgotten cargo, I found him. He was a burly man dressed in oil-stained overalls, his face obscured by the brim of a cap. He was meticulously wiping down a crowbar with a grease-stained rag. I relate, he grumbled, his voice a low rumble. Traffic, I lied, my eyes scanning the immediate surroundings. Nothing out of place, yet everything felt wrong. This wasn't just a robbery, it was a statement. Heard there was some activity around here lately. The man paused his cleaning. Activity, just the usual late-night hustle. Why I asking? Just curious, heard things. I moved closer, my gaze falling on a small, almost imperceptible scratch on the polished metal of the crowbar. It was a fresh mark, too precise to be accidental. And then I saw it. Tucked into the man's belt loop, almost hidden by the fabric of his overalls, was a small silver charm. A stylized raven. My blood, which had been running a little too fast, now seemed to still in my veins. That's a nice charm, I said, my voice carefully neutral. The man's hand instinctively covered it. Souvenir from a trip. A trip to where? I remembered the previous heists. The stolen goods, always valuable but not extravagant. The way the perpetrators had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a cryptic symbol. A raven. What kind of trip? I pressed my eyes locked on his face, searching for any crack in his facade. He finally met my gaze, a slow, unsettling smile spreading across his lips. The kind I don't come back from, detective. The word hung in the air between us, a poisoned dart. He knew, how could he know? My disguise, my carefully constructed anonymity shattered in an instant. This wasn't just a random encounter. This was a trap. The air in the small airport customs late flight tasted like recycled anxiety and stale coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed a weary tune, casting a sickly yellow glow on the linoleum floor. I'd been through enough of these sterile purgatories to know the drill, but tonight, every shadow felt like a watching eye. The metal detector's low growl as I passed through was a familiar, unsettling rumble in my gut. A crumpled ticket stub, a ghost of a destination I'd never reached, was all I had to show for my presence. I'd seen the news report earlier, a blur of flashing lights and hushed pronouncements. Another one. This time it wasn't just a smash and grab. This was artful, too artful. A precision strike on a private vault, the kind that whispered of inside knowledge and a chilling, methodical mind. The kind that echoed the past, a past I'd tried to bury under layers of dust and regret. I watched the customs officer, his face a mask of practiced indifference, stamp a passport. His eyes, however, flickered for a fraction of a second too long towards the discarded newspaper at his elbow. The headline screamed about the brazen heist. He knew, or at least he suspected. The weight of that suspicion settled on my shoulders, heavy as a wet wool coat. A colleague, his face etched with the weariness of too many late nights and too little sleep, approached me. His uniform was crisp, his demeanor professional, but I saw the flicker of recognition, the almost imperceptible tightening around his mouth. He'd been on the periphery of the original case, a junior officer then, tasked with fetching coffee and running errands. Now he was on the inside, and I was on the outside, looking in. I offered a tight nod, my gaze sweeping the empty concourse. No one else seemed to notice our exchange, but that meant little. In this business, attention was a carefully curated commodity. Heard I was around, he continued, his eyes scanning my face. This latest thing, it's got everyone spooked, reminds them of, well, I knew, the phantom limb ache of that unsolved case pulsed beneath my skin. The killer's signature, a meticulous dismemberment of the victim's life before their physical end, had been absent in the initial heists, but this vault, this was different. The security systems bypassed with an almost surgical grace. The vault itself opened not with brute force, but with an intimate understanding of its delicate mechanisms. The methods, I said, my voice rough, unused. They're becoming bolder. My colleague snorted a short, sharp sound. Boulder, Cole, they walked out with enough bearer bonds to buy a small country, and the way they did it, it's like they were invited in. He paused, his gaze fixed on a distant doorway. The precinct's buzzing. They're talking about bringing in specialists, consultants. Consultants. The word felt like a brand. It meant my name would be on their lips again, whispered in hushed tones, linked to the very darkness I'd sworn to escape. They'll want someone who understands the nuance, I said, choosing my words carefully. The unspoken threat, the psychological warfare that was the killer's true medium. They'll want you, he stated plainly, the truth hitting me with the force of a physical blow. He reached into his jacket pocket, his movements deliberate. He produced a small, folded piece of paper. This came in earlier, for I, anonymous, just slipped under my door. My hands trembled as I took the paper. It was heavy, good quality stock. Unfolding, it revealed a single, stark image, a photograph. It was a close-up of a lock, intricate and old-fashioned, its tumblers gleaming under a harsh light. And etched into the brass, almost invisible unless I knew where to look, was a tiny, stylized serpent. The same serpent I'd found, scrawled in chalk at the scene of my first failure. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a copycat. This was a taunt, a direct message. The killer knew I was watching. They were playing a game, and I, it seemed, was the unwilling pawn. My colleague's voice was tight. "What is it, Cole?" I looked up, my eyes meeting his. The weariness in his gaze was replaced by a dawning, unsettling realization. He saw the shift in me, the sudden, coiled tension that had been my old companion. "It's a warning," I said, my voice a low growl, "and an invitation." The small airport customs late flight suddenly felt like a cage. The humming lights seemed to press in, the stale air thick with unspoken threats. This wasn't just about stolen money anymore. This was about the past clawing its way back into the present, and I was the only one who could see the true, terrifying pattern. The stakes had just risen, and I was already in too deep. The small airport customs late flight wasn't just a cage. It was a stage set for a play I'd already seen, a rerun with a different cast but the same chilling script. The air, thick with the metallic tang of jet fuel and the ghost of cheap perfume, did little to mask the gnawing unease in my gut. I watched the faces of the other travelers, a blur of exhaustion and anticipation, searching for a flicker of recognition, a shadow of the meticulous mind I'd chased once before. They were just people going home, going away. But he wasn't just a person. The scanner whined, spitting out my worn duffel bag onto the carousel. Inside, among the crumpled shirts and the dog-eared notebook filled with my own frantic scribbles, lay the evidence. Not physical evidence, not the kind that could be bagged and tagged. It was the echo of a pattern, a whisper of intent that transcended the smashed display cases and the vanished jewels. My fingers traced the faded ink on a receipt from a small pawn shop in the city's forgotten industrial district. It was from the day of the first heist, the one at the gallery. I dismissed it then, a minor detail in the whirlwind of a botched investigation. Now it felt like a breadcrumb, a deliberate, taunting breadcrumb. I'd spent the last 48 hours piecing together the fragments, chasing down every lead, every rumor that slithered through the city's underbelly. The stolen items, seemingly disparate, a rare Fabergé egg, a collection of antique maps, a series of illuminated manuscripts, all had one thing in common: their historical significance. Not their monetary value, though that was considerable. Their provenance, their stories. The detective I'd spoken to at the scene of the latest theft, a man whose face was a roadmap of long nights and bad coffee, had been dismissive. "Just another smash and grab, Cole," he'd said, his voice rough with fatigue. "Some rich collector looking to fence his ill-gotten gains." But he hadn't seen what I saw. I replayed the conversation in my mind, the detective's bored tone a stark contrast to the frantic pulse hammering beneath my own skin. He was wrong. This wasn't greed. This was something else, something older. Back in my cramped apartment, the city lights painting stripes across the bare floorboards, I spread the newspaper clippings across my scarred oak desk. Each heist, a headline screaming of disruption, of loss. But beneath the sensationalism, I found it. A subtle thread woven through the fabric of each crime. The gallery's owner was a descendant of a renowned cartographer. The manuscripts had belonged to a family of esteemed historians, and the Fabergé egg? It had been commissioned by a patron of the arts, a man whose family had built their fortune on. Well, on acquiring things that told stories. My gaze drifted to the photograph pinned above my desk. The serial killer I'd failed to catch, his face a phantom in the grainy newspaper print. The killer who left no trace, who moved like smoke, whose victims were always connected by something intangible, something I'd never quite grasped until now. His motive had been a puzzle I'd never solved, a riddle that had haunted my every waking moment since. The pawn shop receipt. I'd gone there on a hunch, a desperate grasp at straws. The proprietor, a wizened man with eyes that had seen too much, had been reluctant to talk, but he'd eventually admitted to buying a small, nondescript item from a man matching the killer's description, a man who'd paid in cash, his hands gloved even on a warm afternoon. The item, a tarnished silver locket. Insignificant, the proprietor had said, almost worthless. But what if it wasn't? What if it was a key, a piece of a larger narrative? I remembered the killer's victims, their lives meticulously researched, their connections to obscure historical societies, to forgotten lineages. He hadn't been killing randomly. He'd been curating, erasing. The same meticulous planning, the same focus on historical significance, the same phantom presence. This was the original, or someone who knew him intimately. Someone who had access to his methods, his obsessions. Had I missed something vital all those years ago? Had I been too focused on the obvious, the blood and the gore, to see the narrative unfolding before me? The locket, the pawn shop, the historical targets. This wasn't just about preventing more thefts. This was about finishing a story that had been left tragically, terrifyingly unfinished. The fluorescent tubes of the small airport customs, late flight, hummed a sickly yellow tune, each flicker a jolt against my raw nerves. The stale air, a cocktail of exhaust fumes and desperation, did nothing to settle the knot in my stomach. I watched the faces of the travelers, a parade of weary anonymity, searching for a flicker of recognition, a ghost of the past. It was a futile exercise, I knew. He, the architect of my downfall, wouldn't be so careless. My gaze snagged on a man by the baggage carousel, his back to me. The way he held himself, a coiled tension beneath a veneer of casual indifference, was a language I understood. Years ago, I'd learned to read that language in the shadows. He wore a nondescript gray coat, the collar turned up against a chill that wasn't there. He looked like he belonged nowhere and everywhere, a phantom in a world of flesh and bone. My breath hitched. It was him, or someone who walked in his exact footsteps. I moved, a predator closing in, my own footsteps muffled by the worn linoleum. He turned slowly, his face obscured by the brim of a fedora. "Looking for someone, friend?" His voice was a low rumble like distant thunder. "You know who I'm looking for," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. The air crackled, thick with unspoken history. He let out a soft, humorless chuckle. "Cole, still chasing ghosts, I see." He finally tilted his head, revealing eyes that were sharp, intelligent, and utterly devoid of warmth. They were the same eyes that had watched me from across a sterile interrogation room, the same eyes that had held the key to so much pain. "You know why I'm here?" I pressed, ignoring the tremor in my hands. "The jobs, they're his signature." The stranger's lips curved into a thin smile. "Signatures can be forged, or perhaps," he paused, his gaze sweeping over the bustling customs hall, "perhaps some signatures are simply timeless." A wave of nausea washed over me. He was playing games, always playing games. "Where is he?" "He." The stranger leaned closer, his breath smelling faintly of cloves. "You still believe he's a singular entity, a man in a room pulling strings? You always did underestimate the power of a well-cultivated idea, Cole." "Don't talk to me about ideas," I snarled, my fists clenching. "Talk to me about the people he's hurt, the lives he's shattered." "And you, my dear Cole," he murmured, his eyes glinting, "are you not the prime example of a life shattered, a detective brought down by his own obsession?" That stung, a direct hit to the wound I carried. I took a step back, regaining my composure. "This isn't about me, this is about stopping him before he does it again." He shrugged, a casual gesture that belied the danger coiled within him. "And what makes you think I want him stopped, or that I can stop him?" "Because you're here," I stated, a sudden certainty blooming in the pit of my stomach. "You're always at the periphery watching. You're his amplifier, his confidant. You know where he is." The stranger's smile widened, a predator savoring its prey. "You flatter me, Cole, but you misunderstand. I am not his confidant. I am his legacy." He reached into his coat pocket, and my muscles tensed, ready to spring. He pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. "A memento," he said, his voice softening almost tenderly. "From the last time you almost caught him." He opened it. Inside, not a picture, but a tiny, intricately folded piece of paper. It was the same peculiar knot I'd found on the victim's wrist, the one I'd dismissed as a bizarre detail. This man, this stranger, wasn't just an associate. He was the key. You. The memory, sharp and agonizing, flashed before my eyes the sterile scent of disinfectant, the unnerving stillness of the victim. Impossible not. It wasn't just a signature, it was a message. The stranger snapped the locket shut. We all play our parts, Cole. Some are the actors, some the audience, some are the stagehands, ensuring the performance goes off without a hitch. He tucked the locket back into his coat. And some, he added, his eyes meeting mine with an unnerving intensity, are the architects of the entire production. Before I could react, before I could even form a coherent thought, he turned and melted into the throng of passengers. I lunged after him, but the crowd was a living entity, a wall of bodies that swallowed him whole. I pushed and shoved, my shouts lost in the cacophony of announcements and rolling luggage. By the time I broke free, he was gone, vanished. I stood there panting, the metallic tang of jet fuel now a suffocating presence. The locket, the knot, it wasn't just a copycat, or someone so intimately connected that the distinction was meaningless. And the stranger, the man with the knowing eyes, he wasn't just a witness. He was a player. A crucial piece of the puzzle that had just slipped through my fingers, leaving me more lost and more desperate than before. The confrontation had yielded a revelation, yes, but it was a revelation wrapped in a crushing setback, a stark reminder of how little I truly understood. The air in the small airport customs, late flight, hung thick with the scent of stale coffee and desperation. Fluorescent lights hummed a low, discordant tune, reflecting off the polished linoleum floor like a shattered mirror. I'd lost him. The man with the familiar gait, the one who'd looked at me with eyes that held a flicker of recognition, gone, swallowed by the milling bodies of weary travelers, each a silhouette against the harsh glare. My own silhouette felt heavy, a ghost in my own life. I'd chased shadows for too long, both literal and metaphorical. Years ago, the city had whispered my name, not with admiration, but with a sneer. Cole, the detective who'd let the sculptor walk. And now here I was, a private investigator with more regrets than clients, chasing a phantom through a deserted terminal. The customs officer, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Harris, watched me with a practiced indifference. She'd seen it all, I supposed. Desperate parents, anxious businessmen, and now, a man who looked like he'd wrestled with a ghost and lost. "Sir, is there a problem?" Her voice was a dry rustle like leaves skittering across pavement. I shook my head, my gaze sweeping the area again. The man was a wraith. No, just thought I saw someone I knew. She offered a faint, unconvincing smile. Happens, especially with the late flights. Everyone's a bit frayed. She stamped my passport with a decisive thud. Next, I moved through the gate, the weight of my failure pressing down on me. The stolen artifacts, carefully selected, displayed with a macabre reverence. The missing persons, their disappearances as clean and deliberate as a surgeon's incision. I spread the case files across my desk, the worn manila folders a testament to my obsession. The sculptor's signature, a single perfect rose left at each scene. A flourish of arrogance, a taunt. And now the same motif reappeared, not with a rose, but with a meticulously crafted miniature replica of the stolen item placed where the original had been. A twisted homage. I traced the timeline of the sculptor's spree with my fingertip. 6 victims 6 years ago, until now. The heists had started 3 months ago. A priceless Renaissance painting from a private gallery, a collection of ancient coins from a museum's vault, a rare manuscript from a university archive, each one executed with an impossible grace, bypassing security systems that had been deemed impenetrable. My gaze fell on a photograph from the first heist, the empty frame where the painting had hung, and on the wall directly behind where the painting should have been, a small, almost imperceptible indentation. I dismissed it at the time, a flaw in the plaster. But now, seeing the reports from the subsequent heists, it clicked. The miniature replicas, they weren't just placed at the scene, they were integrated into it, as if the original items had never been there at all. My breath hitched. This wasn't about the value of the stolen goods. It was about the act of taking, the performance of it. The sculptor wasn't just a killer, he was an artist. And this new perpetrator was a devotee, or worse, a protege. I remembered the sculptor's victims, not random. Each one had a connection, however tenuous, to the art world. A collector, a curator, a historian, and the man at the airport. His eyes. They'd held a familiar intensity, a predatory gleam I'd seen before. I pulled up the old case files on my laptop, the screen casting a pale glow on my face. I scrolled through mugshots, witness statements, forensic reports. Nothing. The sculptor had been a ghost, his identity lost in the labyrinth of the city. Then a memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. A young intern working on the sculptor case with me, his name lost to the fog of time and alcohol. He'd been bright, eager, almost too eager. He'd had a peculiar fascination with the sculptor's methods, a way of dissecting them, of appreciating the artistry. He'd been let go, a casualty of budget cuts, or so I'd been told. I searched for him in the old employee database. His name? Daniel Sterling, not as a collector, but as a restorer, a craftsman. I looked at the image of the miniature replica from the latest heist, a perfect, tiny replica of a Fabergé egg. The precision, the detail, it was the work of a master craftsman. The pieces began to align, forming a picture far more disturbing than I'd imagined. The man at the airport wasn't just a random encounter. He was watching me. He knew I was back, and the heists, they were a message, a twisted inheritance. The sculptor hadn't been caught. He'd simply disappeared. And now his legacy was being carried on by someone who understood his art, someone who had likely learned from him, someone who was not just imitating the sculptor but evolving him. The motive wasn't greed, it was a statement, a reclaiming of something lost, and the connection to me, it was becoming terrifyingly clear. This wasn't just about the sculptor anymore, it was about my failure. And this new artist, this phantom, was about to paint their masterpiece with me as the unwilling audience. The air in the small airport customs, late flight, hung thick with the scent of stale coffee and exhaust fumes. A single flickering fluorescent bulb cast long, distorted shadows across the linoleum floor, painting the scene in shades of sickly yellow and deep indigo. My breath hitched, a cold knot tightening in my gut. This wasn't just a repeat performance, this was a direct address. The stolen artifact wasn't some forgotten trinket from a distant land. It was a silver locket, intricately engraved with a familiar pattern. A mother's locket, the one I'd given her on her 50th birthday, the one she'd worn every day until she couldn't. It sat on a velvet cushion under a spotlight, a grotesque centerpiece in a gallery of stolen memories. The sculptor hadn't just escalated, he'd laid bare the raw nerve of my past. A uniformed officer, his face a mask of weary indifference, stamped a passport with a perfunctory thud. He didn't look up. Nobody looked up. They were all just passing through, caught in their own orbits of departure and arrival, oblivious to the storm brewing in the sterile, impersonal space of the small airport customs late flight. I remembered the last time I'd seen that locket. It had been nestled in my mother's palm, the silver worn smooth by years of touch. Her fingers, gnarled with age, had traced the familiar swirls of the engraving. And now it was here, a trophy in a twisted game. My gaze swept over the sterile white walls, the rows of empty chairs, the blinking lights of the X-ray machine. This was supposed to be a place of transition, of moving on. Instead, it felt like a trap sprung, a deliberate lure. The sculptor knew. He knew what this meant to me. A colleague, his face etched with concern, approached me cautiously. "Cole, this is different," he stated, his voice low. "The thief or thieves, they're ghosts, but this time..." He paused, his eyes meeting mine. This time they were seen, briefly, yet, even in the grainy resolution, there was a distinct gait, a subtle sway of the shoulders that sent a shiver down my spine. It was the same way the sculptor moved in the few fleeting images we had from the original cases. "It's him," I breathed, the realization a bitter draft. "He's back." The colleague squeezed my arm. "We're pulling every resource. The airport authorities are cooperating. They're rerouting all incoming and outgoing flights for the next 12 hours, conducting thorough searches." 12 hours, it felt like an eternity and yet a blink of an eye. The sculptor operated with an unnerving efficiency. He wouldn't be caught by simple diligence. He was a master of misdirection, a phantom who danced just beyond the reach of the law. I turned back to the display, my eyes fixed on the locket. It wasn't just an object anymore. It was a declaration, a challenge. He was telling me that no matter how far I ran, no matter how deep I buried myself in the past, he could always find me. He could always reach into the remnants of my life and pull out the most precious pieces, tarnishing them with his presence. The weight of my failure, the ghosts of the victims I couldn't save, they all coalesced in that sterile room. The small airport customs, late flight, had become the stage for a personal reckoning. The stakes had been raised, not just for the city, but for my very soul. A sudden thought struck me, sharp and unwelcome. If he had my mother's locket, what else did he have? What other fragments of my life had he collected, catalogued, and displayed? He was unraveling me thread by thread, using my own history as his weapon. "I need to see the full security logs," I said, my voice raspy, devoid of its usual edge. "Every camera, every angle, from the moment they entered the airport grounds." The colleague nodded, already pulling out his phone. "I'll get it for but Cole, be careful. This isn't just a case anymore, he's made it personal." The words hung in the air, a somber echo of my own unspoken fears. Personal. The sculptor had always been about control, about imposing his twisted vision on the world. Now he was extending that control directly to me, using my deepest vulnerabilities as his canvas. I was a target. The sterile hum of the fluorescent lights in the small airport customs late flight seemed to amplify the gnawing silence between the stranger and me. He just said the word, a single sharp shard of truth. Personal. It was a word that had lodged itself under my skin since the first victim, a word I'd tried to scrub away with cheap whiskey and longer nights. But here it was again, delivered with a knowing smirk by a man whose eyes held the glint of a seasoned predator. He leaned against the counter, the worn leather of his jacket creaking softly. The air hung thick with the scent of jet fuel and stale coffee, a familiar perfume of transience that usually offered a strange sort of comfort. Tonight, it felt like a cage. "I think this is just about the money, Cole," the stranger asked, his voice a low rasp. He traced a lazy circle on the counter with a gloved finger. "The timing, the precision, the artistry, it's all a message, and I, my friend, are the intended recipient." I watched his hand, the smooth, dark leather concealing whatever secrets it held. Artistry, the sculptor's calling card. He didn't just kill, he arranged, he posed, and now this stranger, this architect of chaos, was claiming kinship. "I know who he is," I stated, the words tight in my throat. It wasn't a question. His presence here at this hour, at this forgotten corner of the world, screamed it. He chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. Knowing and proving are two different beasts, wouldn't I agree? He pushed himself off the counter, his movements fluid, unnervingly graceful. "But I can appreciate a man who understands the craft, the way he uses the environment, the psychological impact of his choices. It's not brute force, is it? It's finesse." I felt a prickle of unease crawl up my spine. Finesse. That was the word I'd used in my initial reports, a word that had been ridiculed, dismissed as the ramblings of a detective too close to the case. And this man, he was offering me a key, albeit one forged in suspicion. "Why tell me this?" I challenged, my gaze locking onto his, and I am the only one who can truly appreciate the final act. He reached into an inner pocket of his jacket. My muscles tensed, ready to react, but he simply produced a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a note, not a threat. It was a manifest detailing a shipment of, what? High-end electronics, listed with an almost obsessive specificity. Dates, times, serial numbers, a perfect blueprint for a heist. "This," he replied, sliding the paper across the counter, "is the next performance, a grand finale of sorts, but the stage is being set for more than just a robbery." I picked it up, my fingers brushing against his. The paper was cool, crisp. The details were, as he'd said, impeccable, too impeccable. It was a trap laid bare. But who was the prey? And who was the hunter? "You're leading me into something," I accused. "I'm offering you a front row seat," he corrected, his smile widening. "The sculptor is predictable, Cole. His ego is his greatest weakness. He wants you to see him to understand his genius, and this shipment, it's too tempting, too important to ignore." He was right. The manifest wasn't just about the goods, it was about the act of taking them. The location, the timing, the sheer audacity of it all, it screamed the sculptor's signature. He wouldn't resist. He couldn't. "And what do you get out of it?" I pressed, my mind racing. This man, this stranger, was a player, but his motives were still shrouded in a fog as dense as the night outside. "Justice, perhaps," he mused, his eyes glinting with an unsettling amusement. "Or perhaps just the satisfaction of watching a masterpiece unfold. The sculptor has been playing for too long. Don't be late. Cole, the show waits for no one." I stood there, the manifest clutched in my hand, the stranger's words echoing in the cavernous space of the small airport customs late flight. He had laid out the bait, a glittering lure designed to ensnare the serpent. But I was the one who would be standing in the viper's pit. The fluorescent hum of the small airport customs late flight was a sickly yellow wash over the sterile tiles. Dust motes danced in the beams, tiny, oblivious witnesses to the gnawing dread that had settled in my gut. The stranger's manifest, a crisp betrayal of trust, lay on the counter, a map to a predator's lair. He'd called it bait. I called it a one-way ticket to the serpent's nest. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the near silence. The night air outside pressed against the glass, a thick Inkai blanket. The last plane had long since departed, leaving me in this limbo, this echoing tomb of departures and arrivals. The stranger, a phantom with a voice like gravel and a mind like a razor, had promised a meeting. He'd promised answers. He'd promised closure. I was beginning to suspect he'd promised something far more dangerous. My own undoing, the serpent. Years I'd hunted him, a ghost in the city's underbelly, leaving only fragments of his passage. These heists, mirroring his signature, the impossible precision, the unnerving absence of motive. A tremor ran through my hands. It wasn't fear, not exactly. The manifest detailed a shipment, a high-value consignment due to arrive on a private charter. Not customs cleared, of course. The serpent wouldn't operate within the mundane. He'd weave his web in the liminal spaces, the forgotten corners. I traced the inked lines of the manifest with a fingertip, the paper feeling impossibly fragile. But this felt different. This felt personal. The stranger hadn't just pointed me towards the serpent, he'd placed me directly in his path. A faint scuff echoed from the far end of the hall near the service entrance. Nothing, just the wind moaning around the building's eaves. I exhaled, the air tasting of ozone and old disinfectant. My own demons, I knew, were more potent than any phantom threat. I moved from the counter, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the polished floor. The stranger had said, "He'll be waiting. He always wants an audience." An audience for what? For the final act of his twisted play? Or for my final ignominious bow? The service door, a heavy steel slab, stood ajar, something acrid like burnt sugar. My heart, a traitorous organ, began to pick up its pace, a dull thud against my ribs. I drew my weapon, the cool metal a familiar weight in my palm. This was it. I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning a protest. The smell intensified, and then I heard it, a low, rhythmic clicking, like a clock or something else. I moved forward, my senses on high alert, every nerve a taut wire. The corridor opened into a vast, cavernous space, the interior of a hangar. The air here was thick with the scent of oil and decay. Moonlight, fractured by the skeletal ribs of the roof, painted silver streaks across the concrete floor. And there, in the center of the vast emptiness, stood a figure. Beside him, a metal case, its lid propped open, revealing a complex array of wires and blinking lights. The clicking emanated from it. Cole, the voice was a silken hiss laced with amusement. It was the stranger, but it was also the serpent. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. He had been orchestrating this all along. "You," I managed, my voice a hoarse rasp. "Always the detective," he purred, stepping further into the moonlight. Beneath the cloak, I saw the gleam of polished leather, the sharp cut of a suit, and a smile, cruel and knowing. And always the moth to the flame. The clicking intensified. I saw it then, a device, intricate and terrifying. It pulsed with a faint internal light, the heists, the precision. It wasn't just mimicry, and I, my dear Cole, are the conductor's final errant note. He gestured towards the device. "This little beauty is set to broadcast, not just an image, Cole, a feeling. Imagine it, the whole city gripped by a primal fear, a fear that will echo long after the noise has faded." My mind reeled. This wasn't about money, it was about control. About breaking the spirit of the city I had once sworn to protect. The serpent wasn't a thief, he was a vandal of the soul. "I won't get away with this," I answered, the words tasting like ash. He laughed, a dry, rustling sound. "Oh, but I already have. The bait was taken, the trap was set, and I have walked right into the heart of it. The only question now is, will I be a spectator to the end or a participant?" Extended a hand, not towards me, but towards the device. And in that moment I saw it, a faint tremor in his fingers, a flicker of something, not fear but exertion. The strain of holding this all together. He was as much a prisoner of his own machinations as I was. The clicking stopped. A low hum replaced it, a resonant vibration that seemed to seep into my bones. The serpent's smile widened, his eyes glinting in the moonlight. "Show time," he breathed. And then, a blinding flash erupted from the device. The hum died. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding escaped my lungs in a ragged sigh. The device in the stranger's hand went still, its intricate dance of lights extinguished. He didn't fall, didn't collapse, he simply stopped. His shoulders, which had been squared with a peculiar, rigid tension, sagged. The tremor, so subtle before, now ran a visible wave through his outstretched fingers. I watched him, my own muscles coiled, ready for a final lunge or a desperate escape. But the threat had evaporated, leaving behind a vacuum that felt more disorienting than any danger. He lowered his hand, the inert contraption resting in his palm. His gaze met mine, and for the first time I saw not the architect of chaos, but a man utterly spent. "It's over," he whispered, his voice raspy like stones grinding together. I didn't respond, my mind still trying to process the impossible. The stranger, the ghost of the killer I'd chased for years, the puppeteer behind the recent heists, all of it coalescing into this single, weary figure. He hadn't been a phantom. He had been a man hiding in plain sight, his brilliance twisted into something monstrous. We were in the cavernous echoing space of the small airport customs, late flight. The air was thick with the scent of jet fuel and stale coffee, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh, unforgiving glow on the polished linoleum. Outside, the night was a velvet cloak, punctuated by the distant wail of a siren. The few remaining travelers, alerted by the abrupt silence, were a huddled, curious cluster near the departure gates, their faces pale and etched with unease. Why? The question was a raw ache in my throat. All the years of torment, the sleepless nights, the gnawing guilt, it all demanded an answer. He turned his head slowly, his eyes scanning the empty customs hall as if seeing it for the first time. The patterns. He responded, his voice gaining a touch more strength, though it remained low. They needed to be observed, cataloged, but the world, it wasn't ready to see them. They called it madness, so I had to make them listen. He gestured vaguely with the device. This was my attempt to force their hand, to show them the fragility of their systems, the ease with which order could be dismantled. The heists were rehearsals, demonstrations, each one a brushstroke on a canvas only I could fully appreciate. My gaze fell to the device. It was a complex assembly of wires, microchips, and what looked like a miniature antenna. Unfortunate but necessary, to make the message resonate, to ensure the fear was palpable. Fear is a potent catalyst for change, detective, or so I convinced myself. He was a twisted genius, a mind that saw the world as a grand, intricate puzzle, and he, its sole interpreter. He had woven a web of deception so intricate, so vast, that it had ensnared even me, the detective who had once sworn to unravel his every move. I had been so focused on the how of his crimes, I'd missed the why until this very moment. He wasn't driven by malice, but by a warped sense of purpose, a desperate need to impose his vision of order on a world he deemed chaotic. "You were never going to stop, were you?" I stated, not a question. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "The work is never truly done, detective. There are always more patterns to discern, more systems to test, but the urgency has passed. You found me, you understood." He looked at me then, a flicker of something akin to respect in his weary eyes. "That's more than I expected." The distant siren grew louder, closer. Uniformed figures began to appear at the perimeter of the customs hall, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and grim determination. They moved with a practiced urgency, surrounding us, their weapons held at the ready. The stranger made no move to resist. He simply stood, a study in surrender, the weight of his own elaborate scheme finally crushing him. I watched as they apprehended him, their movements efficient, their words clipped and professional. He offered no resistance, no protest. As they led him away, his gaze met mine one last time. There was no triumph in my heart, no catharsis, only a profound sadness. I had caught the killer, but the true victory, I knew, lay in finding my way back to the light.